Have you ever wondered why a cruise ship worth up to $2 billion, costing nearly $1 million a day to operate, still sells tickets for only a few $100s? Are cruise lines accepting losses? Or is there a giant money-making machine behind the pools, restaurants, and paradise beaches that most tourists have never realized? From floating cities, private islands, to secrets about cash flows worth tens of billions of dollars, everything will gradually be revealed. Let's explore this surprising and fascinating story together. Floating cities and suspiciously cheap tickets. There is one thing that most people misunderstand the first time they see a giant cruise ship. They think it is just a floating hotel. But if you stand on the dock long enough and observe carefully, you will realize you are looking at a money-making machine disguised by deep blue pools, night parties, and the smiles of thousands of tourists. Why can a ticket of only a few $100s put me on this ship for a whole week? A guest once asked the check-in staff that question. The girl just smiled. You will understand when the trip ends. At that time, no one paid attention to that answer. The ship slowly left the dock. The whistle blew. Thousands of arms waved. Everything looked like a perfect vacation. But little did anyone know, right when the last anchor line was untied from the pier, a multi-billion-dollar machine officially started operating. A modern cruise ship is no longer a means of transportation. It is an entire city floating on the sea. There are thousands of bedrooms, dozens of restaurants, bars, performance stages, shopping malls, hospitals, gyms, water parks, children's play areas, and even casinos. Every day, that city has to generate its own electricity, filter its own fresh water, treat its own wastewater, provide tens of thousands of meals itself, operate everything itself without being able to call someone to fix it in a few minutes, like on land. That is why the newest ships cost up to billions of dollars. That amount of money is enough to build a large residential area. But in the cruise ship industry, that is just the ticket to enter the game. What I always find interesting is not how big the ship is, but how they make thousands of people believe they are buying a bargain vacation. In reality, the ticket they hold in their hand is just like a key opening the first door. Behind that door is a whole system calculated down to every footstep of the passenger. No detail is placed randomly. No space exists just for decoration. Even the path from the bedroom to the restaurant is purposefully designed. The bigger the ship, the more complex the problem. Every day, it has to serve 6,000 to 7,000 passengers, along with more than 2,000 crew members. Just keeping this floating city running continuously consumes a huge amount of money before earning a single dime of revenue. That is what makes the story strange. If the cost is that huge, why are ticket prices so cheap that many families can still easily afford them? The answer does not lie in the ticket. It lies in everything that happens after the ship's doors close. And from that moment on, each passenger is no longer simply a vacationer. They have become part of a massive revenue-generating machine that very few realize they are stepping into. The coast-cutting machine, behind the luxury lights. The ticket has brought passengers into the floating city, but the bigger question still remains. If the ship costs nearly $1 million a day to exist, how can it still sell unbelievably cheap tickets? The answer does not lie in what passengers see. It lies in things hidden very carefully behind doors reserved only for the crew. One morning, as the ship was still gliding through the Caribbean Sea, I stood next to an old engineer looking at the control panel in the engine room. He smiled faintly. People keep thinking this ship makes money thanks to the crowd. He paused for a few seconds and continued. No. It makes money because it knows how to save every penny before the guests step on board. That sentence stayed with me for many years. Few people notice that many famous cruise ships do not fly the flag of the country where the company is headquartered. The headquarters might be in Miami, but the flag at the stern belongs to the Bahamas, Panama, or Bermuda. That is no coincidence. That is a calculation. Just by changing the registration flag, millions of dollars in costs can disappear from the balance sheet every year. Lower taxes. Some simpler regulations. A lighter operating apparatus. Each saving is very small if looked at individually, but when added up on a multi-billion-dollar ship, the number becomes colossal. And that is not all. The ship is like a miniature United Nations. In the kitchen, there are people from the Philippines. The technical department might be Eastern Europeans. The restaurant has Indonesian staff. Housekeeping features faces from all over the world. Everyone works on contracts lasting many months. A manager once told me very bluntly, The ship cannot run without them. He was absolutely right. They are the ones who keep thousands of rooms clean, dozens of restaurants brightly lit, and the whole floating city operating day and night. While passengers are enjoying dinner, behind metal doors strictly for staff, hundreds of people are still working hard to prepare for breakfast the next day. No music, no applause, only clocks and work schedules. But the biggest secret is still scale. A bridge only needs to be built once. A control room still only has one group of officers on duty. The navigation system, operations center, and many important parts almost do not increase according to the number of passengers. Meanwhile, the number of people on the ship multiplies. Fixed costs are divided among each guest. Each person only has to bear a very small portion. That is why ships are getting bigger and bigger, not to set records, but because the bigger they are, the lower the cost per passenger. And when costs are reduced enough, they can continue to launch attractive tickets, making millions of people believe they have just found a bargain. Actually, the game has just begun. Because after saving almost every possible expense, the next step is where the real money begins to flow into the ship's safe. The ticket is just the bait. When the ship had been far from land long enough, I began to notice something very strange. No more ticket advertising boards, no more check-in counters. No one mentions the price of the trip anymore. Instead, everything on the ship seems to focus on only one goal, making you open your wallet one more time. A bar manager once smiled and whispered to a colleague, "Don't worry about selling tickets, that's done." He tapped lightly on the wristband of a passing guest. "Now is when the revenue begins." The statement sounded very ordinary, but after many days of observation, I understood it was not a joke. The ticket has never been the main product. It is just an invitation ticket for you to step into a world where every need has a ready answer. Thirsty? The drink counter is just a few steps away. Want a change of atmosphere? A fragrant coffee shop is right in the hallway. Want a more luxurious dinner? The specialty restaurant has been lit up early. Want to relax? The spa always has a few empty slots. Want to contact relatives? The Wi-Fi package appears right on the app. Want to bring gifts home? The duty-free shop is always on the most crowded route. What is notable is that you almost don't need to use cash. Just the wristband or a small card in your pocket. One tap. Done. No sound of falling coins. No feeling of paying. Just a few seconds later, the bill is silently added to the account. A couple from Texas I met in the elevator once laughed very happily. "We only plan to have a few drinks." The husband opened his phone to check the end-of-trip expenses. The smile disappeared. "Wait. Why so much?" The wife looked at the screen and shook her head. "I don't remember ordering this much either." That is exactly the special point. Every expense is very small. $10 here, $20 there. A better dinner, a massage session, a sightseeing tour, a few gifts. No single amount is large enough to make people stop. But when adding them all up at the end of the journey, the number is often much larger than the initial ticket price. I also noticed another detail. The most crowded places are always placed where they cannot be avoided. Want to go see a performance? You will pass through the shopping area. Want to return to your room? You have to cross the bar. Want to go down to the port? You will walk past the last brightly lit stores. Every walkway seems to have been calculated years ago. No forcing, no rushing, just very gentle invitations. But millions of passengers make the same choice. That is the power of data. After tens of millions of trips, cruise lines know very well how many drinks a guest will have, what they like, what they usually buy, and how much more they are willing to spend each day of the journey. The ship does not sell you what you need. It appears right when you start wanting it. That is the most sophisticated part of the whole machine. And just when I thought I had understood almost all that secret, another question arose. If everything on the ship is calculated so precisely, why do cruise lines keep building bigger, more expensive, and more complex ships? No corner on the ship is placed randomly. After many trips, I gradually understood a rather cold truth. The ship doesn't wait for you to decide where to spend your money. It decides that long before you step on deck. An expert who participated in interior design for cruise ships told me in a short conversation, "We don't sell drinks," he smiled. "We design moments that make you want to buy drinks." At first, I thought that was just a nice way of speaking, until I started observing every detail. The elevator opens. Right in front is a coffee counter. A few dozen meters away is a watch store. If you want to see the evening show, you have to pass 2 bars and a row of souvenir shops. If you want to go down to the port for sightseeing, the walkway leads right through the duty-free shopping area. Even if you don't intend to buy anything, you still have to see everything. Every time. Every day. A young passenger smiled at his girlfriend. "I'm just passing by." 10 minutes later, he came back with a bag in his hand. The girl looked and burst out laughing. "I knew it. That is not a coincidence." Just like in the casinos in Las Vegas, time on the ship seems to pass at a different pace. Few windows, few clocks, lots of lights. The music is always just lively enough. The atmosphere always makes everyone feel like the vacation is still very long. When people forget about time, they also easily forget how much they have spent. But what surprised me more happened even before departure day. A week before the trip, passengers' phones begin to receive notifications. Pre-book, a drink package for a discount. Only a few spots left for the specialty restaurant. Don't miss the famous sightseeing tour. Book today to save. Everything creates a feeling that if you don't decide right away, you will miss out on something. A father I met at the port opened his phone to show me. "I just booked a few more packages." "Why?" He shrugged. "The app said if I wait until I get on board to buy, it will be more expensive." And he clicked confirm. In just a few seconds, the ship hadn't even left the dock, but revenue had already started flowing into the company's account. The interesting thing is that most passengers don't feel like they are being pushed. Every invitation is very polite. Every transaction feels voluntary. That is exactly what makes this system operate amazingly effectively. It doesn't drag you to the checkout counter. It just arranges everything so that the decision to buy becomes the easiest choice. After millions of passengers, cruise lines no longer rely on feelings. They rely on data. They know which area makes guests stop the longest, know when people are most likely to order another drink, know when a family usually books a sightseeing tour, know even which path generates the most revenue on the entire ship. At this point, I finally realized one thing. The ship is not just a floating city. It is like a giant chessboard. Every store, every restaurant, every walkway is a chess piece that has been placed in the right position for a long time. And when all the links are operating perfectly, maritime corporations begin to think of an even bolder move. If they are already making money everywhere on the ship, then why not own the destination itself? WHEHE, and the destination also belongs to the ship's owner. By now, the picture is almost complete. The ship knows how to sell tickets, knows how to cut costs, knows how to make passengers happily open their wallets multiple times throughout the trip. But there is still a loophole. Every time the ship docks, cash flow begins to pour out. Passengers go ashore, eat at local restaurants, rent cars from residents, buy gifts in small shops, book tours with local companies. Every dollar they spend at that time leaves the cruise line system. That is what large corporations don't like. A CEO once said during a seminar I attended, he pointed to the Caribbean map and asked the whole auditorium, "If you guys own the ship." He paused for a few seconds. "Why let someone else own the destination?" The whole room fell silent. That was not a question, it was a plan. A few years later, private islands began to appear more and more on itineraries. From a distance, they look like paradise. White sand, blue seawater, coconut trees swaying in the wind. Everything is so perfect it's hard to believe. A family that just stepped off the pier cheered, "Here is paradise." Yes, it is paradise. But it is a paradise owned by the very company that just brought them there. This completely changes the game. The drink counter on the island belongs to the cruise line. The restaurant belongs to the cruise line. The amusement park belongs to the cruise line. Beach chairs, cabanas, water parks, electric cars, discovery tours, even many souvenir shops are in the same system. Passengers feel like they have left the ship, but the cash flow has never left the company. A waiter on the island once joked, "Only the place you stand is different." He laughed. The guest's wallet is still in the same place. That is the shortest sentence to explain this model. Previously, when the ship docked, revenue was divided among many local businesses. Now, most of that spending goes right back to the corporation owning the ship, an almost closed circle. Guests pay to board the ship. The ship takes guests to its own island. Guests continue to spend money on that island. At the end of the day, they return to the ship. No need to compete. No need to share revenue with multiple partners like before. Every link connects to the same safe. That is also why large cruise lines are increasingly investing heavily in private islands instead of just looking for new ports. They no longer want to be a transport unit. They want to control the entire journey of the money. From the moment the passenger books the ticket, to the moment they order the first drink, to when they buy the last gift before returning home. After years of following this industry, I realized maritime corporations aren't actually just building bigger ships, they are building increasingly closed ecosystems. As each year passes, fewer coins flow out, more coins return to themselves. That is why the big three corporations still maintain a very far distance from the rest of the market. But exactly when everything seems most perfect, a storm, a technical failure, or a global event is enough to make the whole multi-billion-dollar machine shake. And that is the dark side very few passengers see behind those picturesque beaches. The giant machine only needs to stop to start losing money. By this point, many people would think this is an almost perfect model. Cut costs, increase revenue, keep almost the entire cash flow within the same system. Sounds like a machine that cannot fail. But that is also when the most dangerous part begins to reveal itself. One afternoon, as the ship was preparing to dock, I stood next to a captain who had spent over 30 years drifting at sea. He looked out at the horizon and spoke very slowly. "This ship is not afraid of waves." He paused for a few seconds. "It is only afraid of standing still." It took me quite a while to fully understand the meaning of that sentence. Because every passing day, whether the ship carries one guest or is fully booked in all cabins, a series of bills still appear regularly. The engines still must be checked. The electrical system still must operate. The water purifier cannot be turned off. The technical team still must be on duty. The maintenance staff still must work. Payments to the bank still arrive on the exact day. No one asks how many passengers there are today. They only ask if the bills have been paid. An engineer in the engine room once opened the control panel and told me, "Just one device stops working." He shook his head. "Everything above will soon be affected." That is why the maritime industry is extremely afraid of times when ships have to stay ashore, because revenue almost stops, but most of the costs do not. The machine continues to consume every hour. Even a sharp increase in fuel prices is enough to make millions of dollars in profit disappear faster than many think. A prolonged storm season, a tourist route forced to change, a technical incident causing a trip to be canceled. Every event is like a link being pulled out of alignment. At first, it's just a small vibration. Then the whole system begins to suffer pressure. I once saw an operational plan of a large cruise line. The first thing they care about is not revenue. It is the cabin occupancy rate. Our revenue manager explained very briefly. An empty cabin is the most expensive thing on the ship. He wasn't exaggerating. An empty room still has to be cleaned, still has to have the air conditioning turned on when needed. Still occupies space that costs millions of dollars to build, but it does not bring in any dime of revenue. That is why cruise lines always find every way to fill every room before departure day. Discounts, promotions, last-minute deals, as long as the ship leaves the dock with as few empty cabins as possible. After years of following this sector, I realized the profit of the cruise industry is not fragile because of a lack of guests. It is fragile because costs almost do not know how to wait. Every day the ship exists is like a giant clock counting down. The clock ticks. Money continues to flow out. If the stream of guests continues to step steadily onto the pier, the machine will create numbers making many business sectors jealous. But if that stream of people slows down for a long enough time, the very machine that once created billions of dollars will begin to silently swallow back the owner's money. And history has proven there was a time when almost the entire cruise industry in the world simultaneously had to face that harsh test. The vacation ends, the machine still keeps running. The ship slowly returned to the port. The farewell music played, suitcases were pulled down the pier one after another. People hugged each other, laughing, talking, and telling about a wonderful vacation. A little boy pulled his father's hand. "We'll come back next time, right?" The father smiled. "Sure." That scene happens thousands of times a week at seaports around the world. For the passengers, the trip has ended. But for the company owning the ship, everything has just completed one more cycle. When the last guests leave the deck, the cleaning crew immediately starts working. Fresh food is brought up, fuel is replenished, the technical system is checked, the next passenger list is ready. Just a few hours later, a completely new group of tourists steps onto that exact ship. The machine almost has no concept of resting. After following this industry for many years, what impresses me most is not the ships getting bigger and bigger. It is how the whole system is built like an almost closed circle. The ticket just opens the first door. Inside are dozens of successive services. Then come the destinations belonging to the same system. Then back to the ship again. Money moves in a loop that rarely escapes. A former operations manager once sat across from me in a coffee shop in Florida. He took a pen and drew a circle on a napkin. This is the passenger. He dotted a point in the middle. This is the money. Then he connected everything into a closed loop. Our job is simply not to let this circle break. That is perhaps the shortest and most accurate explanation for the entire cruise industry. Not selling the most tickets, not building the most beautiful ship, but keeping the cash flow running in their ecosystem for as long as possible. So, when looking at the financial reports of large corporations, don't just look at ticket revenue. That is just the tip of the iceberg. The real value lies in the small expenses that appear continuously throughout the journey. A glass of water, a dinner, an internet package, a relaxation session, a sightseeing tour, a gift before returning. Each individual transaction is very normal, but millions of identical transactions repeated every year on dozens of ships have created one of the most effective business models of modern tourism. Someone once asked me after hearing the whole story, "So, are passengers being scammed?" I answered immediately, "No. They received exactly the vacation they bought. The more interesting thing lies elsewhere. That is, they step onto the ship to seek days of relaxation, while the ship owner has prepared a whole system to turn every moment of that relaxation into revenue." Perhaps that is the most thought-provoking thing. The next time you see a giant floating city slowly leaving the dock in the sunset, remember that beneath the pools, the performances, and the smiles is a financial machine operating almost continuously. A machine where the ticket price is never the destination. It is just the first invitation for you to step into a cleverly designed ecosystem where the vacations of millions of people had become the fuel helping the floating cities continue reaching out to the ocean, trip after trip.